Keeping from the chair. My name is Silvia. I'm an AUSIT member in New South Wales, part of this year's organising committee. And I am very, very excited about chairing this 1 hour session to consider issues of sustainability of the translation and interpreting industry. And before we get into it, I know that we've done this before, but a personal acknowledgement as well of the fact that we are doing our work, holding this space on the land of the Bedegal people. So I acknowledge those traditional custodians, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to all our First Nations colleagues who are with us today, taking such an active part in this conference as well. It is a note, this session is for 1 hour, so if you do intend to go to any sessions in the half hour, please make sure that you're at the edge of your seat. And I guess in doing a little bit of further context setting, I think it's important to be really clear that when we're talking about sustainability of the translation and interpreting industry, we are very much focusing on the provision of language services within that public space, what we talk about domestically as community interpreting and translating. That's the space that we're focusing on. And it really is a fundamental discussion in the heart of this conference, which has the intention of creating that's the space to consider the work that we do in the most sensitive and complex settings. We know that the impact of inadequate interpreting in some of these settings is extremely serious. But we also know that many of the challenges that the industry faces have been identified for a long time, and various recommendations have been provided time and again. So the selection of the program, which hasn't been part of what people have submitted, which has made a fantastic program all up, but the selection of some of these major sessions in this room are very much about focusing on that space and really thinking about everything that we already know that needs to be improved and what are the next steps to get there. We had some amazing input yesterday, both through the Jill Blewett Memorial Lecture and the presentation on the Multicultural Framework Review. And I hope that this session is very much about our AUSIT members, practitioners in general, the industry at large, to have an opportunity to hear directly from some of the parties, some of the organisations that have been playing a really important part in this space in recent times. And as I just mentioned, consideration of that Multicultural Framework Review that is active at the moment, where a report to government is still to go, the kind of issues that Rob, through the JBML, addressed yesterday, the Language Services Action Forum that we're going to hear about. So this is really an opportunity to hear from these key participants and to consider issues of policy, government procurement processes, working conditions for translators and interpreters, quality assurance of how services are actually provided. So to do that, we've got an amazing roundtable that you can see here on the screen, representing people involved in government policy as well as language service providers. So we have Ali Mond, who's the Assistant Secretary of Migrant English and Language Service in the Australian Government's Department of Home Affairs, which of course has responsibility also for a very significant language service provider, which is TIS National. From New South Wales, we have Breda Diamond, who is the Director of the Language Services Division of Multicultural New South Wales. So within this state, a fundamental language service provider, both in the legal space, courts, police, but also in a more general settings through, for example, Service New South Wales. Mark Painting, the Chief Executive Officer of NAATI, which, as we all know, is the standard-setting accreditation authority. The name says national. There is now an international connection in that credentials are applying across New Zealand as well. Kevin Roux, Managing Director of Connecting Now, which is a private sector language service provider that works across Australia and New Zealand. And of course, we have organisations that are made up and represent us as practitioners. So our national president, the national president of AUSIT, Angelo Berbotto, is participating, as is Jill McCabe, the Chief Executive Officer of Professionals Australia, which holds the division that many of us know as TIA, or Translators and Interpreters Australia, and that is the national union for us. And we've also invited Rob as a friend with an eye from outside, that, as you heard yesterday and even today through various interventions, a very well-educated eye, and perhaps bringing a perspective from other industries as well. So the structure of this hour, of what's left of this hour, we're going to have one presentation only, which is going to be for us to hear from Mond, with a presentation that really sets the scene for some of the key issues that concern us today. Then other participants will provide their reflections from the perspective of their organisations. Because we've got such a great panel, I don't think we're going to have a lot of time for questions, so I preempt that, but we will write down your questions and we will enable some way of getting those questions to the panel and with further discussion. If we have time for questions, great, but it might be tricky. So, not taking up any more of that time, I now invite Mond.
Thank you, Silvia, and I just want to say thank you to Angelo and Silvia and all the team at AUSIT for putting on this wonderful conference. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to address you today, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel. I also just want to acknowledge the other panel members here with me today and note the diverse range of organisations that we represent, which really reflects what a key focus this is for all of us, and that it's going to take a concerted effort from all of us to address these challenges and make meaningful change. So as Silvia said, I head up the Migrant English and Language Services branch of the Department of Home Affairs, and in the language services space we have responsibility for TIS National, the free interpreting and translating services, managing the Commonwealth relationship with NAATI, and maintaining the Australian Government Language Services guidelines. Earlier this year, at the beginning of this year, we established a team to specifically look at issues impacting the sustainability of the language services sector. So I'm just going to give a brief presentation that outlines the work the team's done over the year. Great. So this first slide, I'm just going to step back because I'm actually going to refer to the slides myself, provides a brief overview of the current state of the translating and interpreting sector. And a lot of these stats we've actually heard through other presentations over yesterday and today. And none of this will be a surprise to you, so I'll go through this fairly quickly. We've been seeing a steady increase in the number of low English speakers in Australia, and that's only going to continue increasing as migration increases. And obviously, as you all know, even people with higher English proficiency require interpreters in high-risk settings. Governments are the biggest procurers of language services in Australia, and AusTender data shows us that over the last 5 years, the Australian government spent $400 million on translating and interpreting services, and we estimate that that makes up around 30 to 40% of the total spend of government on interpreting and translating services. So that gives government a real buying power to drive reform in this sector. And we also obviously have a real reliance on the sector in order to reach our vulnerable clients. And we all know of cases, and we've already heard some really harrowing cases through other presentations today and yesterday of where things have gone terribly wrong when interpreting and translating hasn't been used effectively. And COVID-19 was unfortunately a real example of that. An independent review, the Fault Lines Review in 2022, that looked at the Australian government response into the pandemic, found that culturally and linguistically diverse communities had 2.5 times the mortality rate compared to the broader Australian community during COVID, and that they were often relying on international news sources that were in language that didn't reflect the directions and advice that was coming from governments at the time. As already has been mentioned, we've got an ageing interpreting workforce. When you look at NAATI data and you exclude Mandarin and Chinese speakers, you can see that 21% of our workforce is already over the age of 65, and 44% is already over the age of 55. And then this last graph shows how unmet demand for TIS National has changed over the last 10 years. So we've been talking about sustainability in this sector for a long time. And in 2013, our key focus was really looking at new and emerging community languages, and you can see there that's reflected in the unmet demand at the time in Somali, Bengali, Rohingya. Unfortunately, nothing significant has been done to address the sustainability issues, and we're now seeing today at TIS National that some of our highest unmet demand is in more established languages, such as Portuguese, Spanish, Italian and Greek. And we all know there's no shortage of those speakers in Australia, but there's just no incentive for people to join the workforce. So to better understand how this is impacting practitioners on the ground, earlier this year we did a survey of translators and interpreters, and thank you to all of you who participated in that survey and also helped us to distribute the survey. We were really thrilled with the response. We had over 2,200 responses. And we will share a full summary. It's available on our website through a QR code that I'll show at the end of this presentation, and it's also available at the TIS National store. But unfortunately, like many casualised and low-paid sectors, this is a female-dominated sector with 69% of respondents being female. Similar to what we saw with the NAATI data, it was around the ages. We can see here that already over, I'm trying to do my maths quickly here, 2191, 31% are already over the age of 60 of respondents, and only 23% are under the age of 39. And also reflecting what we've been hearing anecdotally, a high number of respondents said that they don't have formal qualifications, with 24% saying they do not have any formal interpreter qualifications, and 19% saying that they don't have a NAATI certification. And I should have said that from those over 2,200 responses, around 75% were interpreters. I've just got the 5-minute warning, so I'm going to speed up. Thank you. So, as we know, the interpreting and translating sector is operating in somewhat like a gig economy, and the results reflected that. And these results are very similar to what Rob presented from the Queensland survey yesterday. I'll just read through some of these very quickly. 68% think the casualised nature of the work is impacting turnover. Almost 90% claim that poor remuneration is having an impact on the sector. It's getting harder to retain qualified interpreters and translators due to these issues, and 33% indicated that they're likely to leave the sector, mostly in the next 2 to 5 years, and 60% wouldn't recommend this as an occupation to others. Poor working conditions, combined with the lack of regulations and incentives for interpreters and translators to go through their formal training, has seen many non-credentialed individuals enter the workforce. Over 70% of respondents know of non-NAATI credentialed interpreters being used in high-risk assignments, and 45% know of poor quality interpreting currently occurring in high-risk settings. And we've heard already some of those stories. We did receive dozens and dozens of harrowing stories through this survey. I'm not going to read these out given I'm already on the 5-minute warning. I'll let you quickly have a look at those, and please download and read the summary. But as we know, these cases seem to be becoming more and more common. Just a couple of days ago, the BBC reported that over the last, I think in a 4-year period, poor quality or lack of interpreting has been found to be a contributing factor to the death or permanent brain damage of 80 babies in the UK. So as Christina Castley said yesterday, we're already at the stage where we're seeing horrific headlines in this space. So earlier this year, we also commissioned Deloitte to do some economic analysis into the current state of the interpreting sector and the cost around the current provision of interpreting. The research took into account a large body of publicly available and privately obtained data, including targeted consultations with many key stakeholders, and thank you again to those of you who are involved in that. The scope of it included multicultural interpreting services, so it did not include First Nation languages or translating or Auslan. And within the spoken multicultural interpreting services, it focused on key service settings in health, aged care, legal services, the Humanitarian Settlement Program, and Services Australia. And so Deloitte defined suboptimal interpreting as both low quality interpreting, which is when it's delivered by non-certified interpreters or interpreting delivered via telephone in critical and high-risk settings where a face-to-face interpreter was required, and also unmet demand for interpreting, where an interpreter is not used, including unfilled demand, where an interpreter was requested but could not be provided, or latent demand, where interpreter should have been used but was not requested by either the individual or the business. So Deloitte then looked at, sorry, I've just got distracted by the 2-minute warning. Okay, she said it's okay. So Deloitte estimated the extent to which low quality and unmet demand is happening, and then it did an economic analysis on the outcomes likely to occur in these settings and the costs that was incurring for individuals, governments, and broader society. And here are the findings. So Deloitte have estimated that the current cost of suboptimal service provision is costing Australian governments and societies between $326 million per year at the lowest and most conservative estimate, and up to as much as $892 million per year. And again, this captures costs across the Australian government case studies, which was in Aged Care Legal, the Humanitarian Settlement Program, and Services Australia, and their respective agencies, and public hospitals and health services across Australia. And I again need to reiterate that this only looked at multicultural interpreting services. It didn't cover translating, First Nations, or Auslan. So this is just one snapshot, but you can see that the costs are huge. And you can see on the side here what those costs are derived from. So factors such as increased length of hospitalisation, adjourned hearings or misinterpreted testimonies, malpractice suits and administrative burdens. And we've been hearing some case studies already through these presentations of how that's playing out. The lower estimate of $326 million takes into account low quality and unfilled demand. And the higher estimate is of $892 million, also considers latent demand, so when an interpreter was not requested but should have been. And Deloitte has estimated that these costs will increase by a further 18% over the next 10 years as the number of low English speakers grow and as we continue to lose non-credentialed language service practitioners. So Deloitte made a number of recommendations, including around government procurement practices and awareness raising amongst key cohorts on why and how to gain access to language services. To consider these and other opportunities for reform, a couple of months ago, the department established the Language Services Sustainability Action Forum, which is made up of representatives from each state and territory government and also a range of peak bodies that you can see here. And through that forum, we've been discussing things and ideas for reform around things such as procurement practices, employment models, regulations, better training and professional development, and awareness raising. Of course, this work is also feeding into the Multicultural Framework Review that you heard Christine Castley speak about yesterday. And as you heard from her, language services has been identified as really a key pillar of the report and the recommendations likely to go forward. And you may have also seen the Disability Royal Commission also has some very specific recommendations around interpreting and translating that a lot of this work is likely to feed into. And so finally, I just want to also let you know that we recently presented on this work at the Ministerial Forum for Multicultural Affairs. It was held on the 3rd of November, which brings together the Commonwealth and State and Territory multicultural ministers who are all in agreement about the set of challenges facing the sector and who've all agreed to work together and collaborate on and driving reform and improvement. So this is a really huge step in terms of governments at all levels in Australia committing to work together to address these issues. So I will leave it there. This is the QR code for the interpreter survey, interpreter and practitioner survey summary. Thank you so much, Silvia.
Thank you so much, Ali. And my formal thanks to Louis as well for attempting to keep us on time. Thank you. I'll now invite all our panel members to maybe take a seat, face the audience, but we already had a request for response from workers' representatives. So Jill McCabe, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Silvia, and thank you to Ali and her team for all the fantastic work that's being done at the federal level to bring about reform. As Ali said, this is going to take concerted and coordinated effort by all the major players here, government, Professionals Australia, other professional bodies, and it is a complex issue. However, most of the problems that we see are stemming from the inherent undervaluation of the work, as we discussed yesterday, lack of appreciation of the skills and expertise of professionals. Translators and interpreters are professionals. Yesterday we heard a lot about respect. That's really important, but as well as respect, you need recognition and reward. We will not attract young people to the profession unless the pay and conditions improve dramatically. As Ali's presentation showed, we're just not attracting younger people to this profession, and it's going to result in even greater costs to the community and also to government. We know that young people are focusing their education and their enrolment in courses. It's all about secure and well-paid jobs for them, especially in this economic environment. They want to work for best practice employers. They want employers who respect them, value them, and pay them for their skills and their knowledge. And they're simply not going to go and work for anyone who doesn't. The language services providers engage translators and interpreters directly. They determine the pay and conditions. And like any employer, they must have policies and practices that not only comply with laws, but fairly reward people. And that's why Professionals Australia has been pursuing improvements through the industrial relations system. We're looking for a federal award that will set an absolute minimum, but we also want bargaining above that so that people are getting much higher market rates of pay and conditions. Because at the moment, the way that the industrial relations system works is that many of you are employed effectively as independent contractors, like a labour hire arrangement. The national employment standards don't apply to you. You don't have an award. You don't have anything that sets the minimum. And that's why we've got the situation we've got today. We have to get a federal award that sets really good terms and conditions as a minimum, and that's what our objective is. Our objective is also to get multi-employer bargaining to take it beyond that. Now, of course, we know that government has an important role to play in the sector because it's the largest contractor for language service provision. So government does have a role to play here, and they will need to ensure that they don't establish their contracts just on the basis of cost and efficiency. As Ali said, what we've got to do is look at contracts with language service providers that are actually about value, about quality and great outcomes. One of the things that I suppose we're also very concerned about at Professionals Australia is who's auditing performance once you have a contract. As government, when I worked in the Victorian government and I was working in health and human services, we had really strong mechanisms to audit the performance of those organisations that were delivering services for government. The same should happen with language service provision. There must be auditing of the material of the work that's being done by language service providers. And finally, I'd like to just reflect on Professionals Australia's submission to the Multicultural Framework Review. I can't go through all of our recommendations, more than happy to share our submission with you. We actually advocated at a high level for the elevation of language services as a key priority for the federal and state governments. We want to see a discrete language service agency established at the federal level with adequate resourcing to undertake workforce development and sector planning. We also think that that agency would have responsibility for establishing a framework for procurement, basically a model for procurement going forward. So national standards, and we want to see national monitoring and reporting that measures quality, value and impact. As I mentioned before, we're going to be utilising the IR system to ensure adequate minimum standards of pay and terms of employment, and that will need to feed through to that procurement model. Because again, we also will need to see governments providing adequate funding to the agencies who will be contracting language services. And finally, we'd like to see greater enforcement, especially ensuring that government, when they're procuring language services, that they're using accredited professionals. Again, it's really, really important that we continue to see career development, recognition of professional qualifications and experience. So they're my reflections, and I think that if we don't actually implement those, we're going to see even a worse scenario than Ali indicated this morning. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. Firstly, welcome here, and thanks, Ali, for the presentation. I think as we've all discussed, we've heard lots about the challenges and issues. I think there is a risk of oversimplifying some of these challenges because they are complex, but that doesn't mean they can be continued to be ignored. I think already we've seen some great progress within the Commonwealth, and thank you, Ali and team, for the work so far. It is really, really important to have when presenting solutions to government, and let's face it, we know government's got to be a major factor here, to have an evidence base to start with. And so what we've already seen here is a really good, important start to that. NAATI is a very strong supporter of PA's push for a national award, and we've been supportive of that. And the other thing we know in not only this sector, but most of them, some of these big changes, big reforms are going to require real collaboration, and all of the important stakeholders, including us up here, are really committed to that, and it is going to require that level of collaboration. But I think, and be fair, it's not going to be an overnight change either, but all of these things need to come together: policy, procurement, industrial instruments, certification, of course. NAATI certification, obviously, we think is an important part of that plank. It's not the only thing. It's part of a wider ecosystem, but an important one as part of it. So I think we've all got a part to play, and we look forward to working with all the key professional associations and stakeholders to do so. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Breda Diamond from Multicultural New South Wales. I feel like my reflections are that we're very fortunate at Multicultural New South Wales because we have a state award, but that doesn't mean the work is done. There's a lot more work to be done in terms of sustainability of the industry. And so when I talk about supporting, training, skilling up, or sending interpreters and translators out onto jobs, I really think of it from the industry lens. So a long time ago, when I worked in a very similar industry, when I worked as a social worker, one of the things that we were, learned back then is that we are training for the industry, not just our organisation. And it's about professionalising the organisation and making sure that, the challenges back then in out-of-home care, residential care, where you had often very similar scenarios of low-paid, predominantly women in the workforce, so it's really about taking those learnings for me and trying to make sure that, to the best of my ability, every day that I apply that in my work at Multicultural New South Wales. So the stuff that we're trying to do to support and sustain the industry is around ensuring that we're up there advocating at the government level for the challenges that we're all facing as an industry. So, we heard this morning about the importance of procurement, and we certainly, we know that's a challenge, but also the capability building within the industry is a challenge. So programs like scholarships, programs like training programs, they can't be underestimated. We need to make sure that we're supporting the workforce so that they will continue to be in the workforce. Otherwise, it's so easy to leave. And that's the challenge that we're facing. So having the government contract for courts, for police, for Service New South Wales is only part of the equation. Having an award is only part of the equation. If we don't have the people to do the work on the ground, then we're in a lot of trouble. So it's really about supporting the industry from that perspective. Technology has to play a part, and I'm not talking about the technology in terms of machine translations or AI. I'm talking about technology from booking systems and operating systems, because it's very easy in a casualised workforce to not put the money into those operating systems that we need to make it successful. If I think about some of the challenges for our interpreters and translators, they work for multiple employers. We have a casualised workforce, and what can happen is they don't have one central system, so they're trying to book their jobs from 8, 10 employers or 10 different organizations that they're working for. And so how do you've got a whole other layer of complexity around administration. So those sorts of things don't help us. They work against us. So pipelines, capabilities, looking at where we're going to get our talent from, as people can quite rightly retire if they want to. We've got the challenge of, recently we honoured some of our interpreters and translators with 50 years of service. 50 years. It's almost like some of the religious institutions where you're not allowed to retire. Like that's how I think of it. There's no retirement. Because the work is never done. And so how do we support new people to come into the industry and support them to be successful? You can't be successful unless we have the education programs, the remuneration, the proper expectations, the work health and safety, all of those things to support people to do the work that we want, the really essential work that we need them to do. So, we're trying our best at Multicultural New South Wales. We're taking the approach of make it easy, which is one of the key government slogans or taglines from Service New South Wales, where, we're making it easy for our customers to book, to get the right person to the right job at the right time, making it easy for our interpreters and translators through toolkits, trying to acknowledge that they have a difficult job, trying to be supportive of them, but there's lots more work to do. So it is a challenge, it is complex, and I did like the Parliamentary Secretary's comment today that 3 days is not going to be enough. There's a lot more work to do. So thank you.
I was thinking whether we need to talk to the Vatican and create a new order of interpreters and translators, since it is a vocation. I'm grateful for all the data, all the work that the department is doing. As Rob mentioned yesterday, there is a void there, and I think it's very commendable that this administration is looking at starting to implement ways of ensuring that the data is coming. Because without data, without evidence, the politicians are not going to make changes. And we need that leadership. It has to come from top. Because this has to be recognized as an essential service. I have 4 reflections. The first one is that when untrained bilinguals are used instead of practitioners, your reputation is harmed. Your job is harmed. Because people, won't make a difference between, interpreter that is qualified, NAATI, or recognized practitioner, and somebody from the street. We are all harmed when somebody who, for whatever reason, is doing the job hasn't is not a professional. So if people want to pursue a career as a practitioner, as a translator or interpreter, they just need to get trained. The second point I wanted to talk about is in the survey that I conducted recently. Most practitioners supported the idea that LSPs should be certified. And I completely am behind that. And the reason for that is that our ethical framework at the moment talks about practitioners and the consumer. And what we as practitioners, what we have to do, accuracy, competency, etc. But the LSP is the elephant in the room, and the LSP can put practitioners in situations of ethical dilemma. So people who have these big responsibilities as LSPs also should go through a system of certification, because at the moment, anybody can open an LSP. And I have dealt, in my short presidency of 1 year, I have dealt with 2 cases of rogue people who were not interpreters, were not translators, were with business people who wanted to make money out of our work. So, if you want to open a pub, you need to get a license. If your bartenders have to do the course for serving alcohol responsibly, there are steps. Well, for opening an LSP, there should be. And I have nothing against LSPs, but I just want to be, as consumers have the right to know that I am a qualified linguist and I know how to do my job as a translator, I, as a practitioner, want to make sure that the LSP I'm dealing with is an LSP that is not going to put me in ethical problems and situations. Point number 3 is that we need more data, and we need our academics and our PhD students to have access to that data so that we can see how the situation evolves. Because if we have studies on these issues, if we have writings, we can take it further. So any PhD or prospective PhD students look at going into this type of language policy as well. And my final point is that we cannot look at this industry as a monolithic industry. The recommended national standards on working with interpreters and interpreters in courts and tribunals has something unique and very useful. It classifies our languages in 4 tiers. And the needs and the environment in which people in Mandarin and Spanish work can be quite comparable because they are in tier A. Compare that with somebody in a tier C or D language, where they're not, if they're interpreters, they're not going to be perhaps every day in court or in the hospital. But sustainability means that there has to be some arrangement to keep that person working in the language industry. Otherwise, they will go to another job. So sustainability has to be looked not in a monolithic way. There are 200 different languages or more, where there are 250 situations. So it is extremely complex, but it's not impossible. And I feel hopeful because, for example, at the moment, the team that Ali heads, well, these are people that are starting to understand this industry. One of the contributors to many issues in government is that we have dealt with civil servants who are monolingual and who don't understand how language services work. And when they do, they go on being promoted to another department. So, and that is an issue. So I'm hopeful, and I hope that the duplication that Breda has been talking about, that is a stumbling block. There is a lot of unnecessary duplications, and AUSITs are very smart. They have to get this right, and I am hopeful. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Angelo, and thanks for the team today. One of the tough act to follow, seeing that Angelo mentioned LSPs as the elephant in the room, and I'm an LSP. So I think one of the key things from my perspective is, if you go and have a look at my LinkedIn profile today, you'll see it's probably not been updated. I've been very blessed to come into this environment, very new, and from a much of an outsider perspective, looking at what's currently happening. And my journey for the last 8-9 weeks within Connecting Now is one of those whereby we look at people, I look at people from a personal perspective and look at the ethical side of things and the friendship and the family and everything that comes with that. And we have to look at that in business as well. You know, business is out there to make money, and we all understand that. So are the people delivering those services. And if we do not look at those interpreters, you guys that's out there in the audience today, it's going to fail. So in saying that, I'm coming from a much of an outsider perspective, but also what I've been able to see is what are we doing in the schools aspect. You know, so my kids are currently in an Auslan environment. Second language is Auslan. My oldest one doesn't care for it. My youngest one absolutely loves it. And one of the key things is he's been asked as a as a 9-year-old rather, to stand in front of the school and to do this Auslan interpreting. And one of the key things that I ask him is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he says, Dad, I want to be an interpreter. So what do I do with that? So being from Adelaide, the only school that I can send him to is to Adelaide High, because that's where the Auslan interpreting side of things come in. So I'm already looking at it from a dad perspective, from a business perspective, to say, how do I take a 9-year-old, put him through the system in order to get to university, for him to get a scholarship in order to go and do these type of things. But then I look at the back end and looking at the fair pay that everybody's been speaking about on the panel. We're looking at the sustainability of the industry and saying, is this actually the right thing? Getting in a cab yesterday, as an LSP, we try everything in order to sign up our interpreters to be NAATI certified, to go through the system. And I have a conversation with our cab driver on the way here and say to him, what language do you speak? Where are you from? And he says, I'm from Pakistan. And I'm like, have you ever heard about language services and what we can offer? And he says, yes. And I've actually stepped out of that role. And it's because of the pay. It's because of the fair work. It's because of everything in the background. He's a dad that needs to be able to provide for his family, but he can't do that because he has to juggle between work, school, and all of the other things in the background and still be able to provide these language services. So as an LSP, at this point in time, I need you more than you need me. And I think that's a key thing to note. So where I sit today is to say, I do not think it's all doom and gloom. Can it be fixed? Absolutely. Is it going to take time? Yes. Do we need the support of government? Do we need the support of the panel? Do we need the support of the team around us in order to make this work? Absolutely. So what I will also say is I'm doing a presentation tomorrow about artificial intelligence, lost in translation, all of the things above, where AI is going to take over the role of the interpreter. And I don't think that's true. I think it can work very well together, but it will never take away the emotional side of things, the empathy side of things. So I urge you to come and have a look at that presentation tomorrow. It's definitely not going to be all about stats and data. It's going to be videos and some funky things in the background. But the key component is, and what I want to leave you with today is, think about us as LSPs, that it's not just about the business side of things, but it's about seeing you as an extension of our family. And you would see that in my bio as well. And if we can trust us in order to provide you with those services and to provide you with the correct pay, the ethicalness around that, I do believe that there's much more in terms of this industry that we can provide. So yeah, I think that's my time. I haven't got the minute, but Angelo took it, so I'll pass it on. Thank you for your time, team.
Look, I've already had an opportunity to address you all several times, both in yesterday in the Jill Blewett and also in several questions I've asked. First of all, by the way, I'd like to acknowledge Ali and Lee and the team for the wonderful work that they've done and just how much encouragement they've given to me and to other people by actually stepping up and doing something. But they can't do it alone. We sit here as a group and we know what the issues are. Somebody said to me yesterday, gee, you did a really good job of summarizing the things we've been talking about for the last 20 years. Fair enough. Come on, Heather, you said 20 yesterday. Anyway, the point, though, is we all talk to ourselves, among ourselves, about that. But we need to talk to the rest of the world. Over 70% of Australian doctors do not regard interpreters as a necessary component of the healthcare team. That's got to change. Okay? How is it going to change? It's going to change by you talking to your doctor and you getting your doctor to talk to the RAC, or the Royal College of General Practitioners and other people who are involved in education. It's going to change in terms of money that's available by you talking to your member of parliament, your local member, and your federal member, and getting them interested in what this means, and getting them interested in the impact that they can have on their constituency, the people who vote for them, if they pay attention to this issue. So I challenge you all, get out and talk to somebody outside of the existing framework, outside of AUSIT, and get some help. The folks who are doing things well now, they can stand the heat. We know that Ali and the team can say, we've been doing things when they get questioned by their members, and then they can suggest to their members that more can be done. But you have a really essential role because you are an essential or critical service. You know that because you are the precursor to every major service that's regarded as being critical in our environment. Health, justice, police, first responder, medical, first responder, public safety, and aged care. All those critical providers do not do their job at all well for a major segment of the community if you aren't there to help. But they've got to know it. The public in general has got to know it. And the people who make decisions and control the purse strings have got to know it. So get out there and use your voice. Thank you.
Just before I hand it, a challenge has been thrown and I'm picking it up. As chair even, we do it every day. And the problem, part of the problem, and we talked about this in the previous panel when we had the health roundtable, one of the issues that people raise there is the difficulty that we have as interpreters every day needing to educate on the most basic needs of our job. And yes, it's true that not everyone does it well. Not every interpreter does it well. But the whole thing about individual practitioners having the responsibility for the quality of what is an essential service to everyone needs to stop. We need greater collaboration. We need doctors to be educated within their degrees, not when they come across, part of the 29% of the Australian population that doesn't use English as a first language. And let's not even talk about them coming across First Nations people who don't use English as a first language. It's not only up to us. So yeah, good challenge, but there's a bigger challenge that is for everyone to recognise the importance of working across language. There's a gap in this roundtable as well, and that's my fault. So as well as taking a challenge, I take the fault. I see colleagues here from excellent educational institutions of interpreting and translation programs. That education from a professional perspective is also a fundamental part of the ecosystem, and these colleagues should have been in this roundtable as well. So my apologies there, but you're certainly not forgotten from the general ecosystem. We do have a few more minutes. Thank you, Louis. We've got lunch at 12:30, so Ali, happy to hand back to you for further reflections. If there's any questions within the, and then Jill also wants to, but you go.
Great, thanks, Silvia. I'd just like to pick up on a point that Kevin made, that I also agree it's not all doom and gloom. The stats look pretty dire, but I think we've got some really great opportunities here. It's a really positive start that we've got at both government levels and across NGOs and across peak bodies. There's a very common understanding of what the key challenges are, and there's a very common understanding, shared understanding of what's needed to start to address those issues. So I think we are in a positive space in that respect. And that Australia has always been known to be a world leader in this space. We're celebrating 50 years of TIS National providing telephone interpreting this year, but TIS National was actually established 76 years ago as a translation organisation after post-World War II. The fact that we have organisations like NAATI and AUSIT, we're the envy for most of the world in this space. So I think we're also at a real crossroads where we now can have the opportunity to keep going forward and continue being a leader in this space.
Jill, I think you want to grab a mic. If there is time, I'd like to ask a question to Ali afterwards.
Can you hear me? Yes, great. Thanks, Rob. I suppose I just wanted to take up on that issue about individuals advocating to members of Parliament and to doctors. I think I just wanted to reinforce what Silvia has said, that from where I sit, a collective voice is far more influential. Of course, individuals have a role to play, but we do need to actually change systems. This is a systemic issue, and certainly I know that Professionals Australia and AUSIT, our role is to represent you in industry, but also to government. And I know that Professionals Australia, we've met with many government agencies, and we're certainly also organising to meet with ministers in the near future. So again, I just reinforce that I think that you actually have a far greater opportunity for success when you've got a collective voice and more people involved in bringing about change, because government will take that far more seriously. And the other issue I just wanted to raise with Kevin was around the language service providers and acknowledging that you've only been in your role for such a short period, but certainly in the past when Professionals Australia has advocated for improved terms and conditions, we've met extreme resistance from language service providers. We had made submissions back in 2017 for some significant improvements through an award, and the employers opposed that. So I suppose, Kevin, one of my questions to you is, it's putting you on the spot, but are you happy to come out and support the establishment of a national award with improved terms and conditions for language service TIs?
Yeah, definitely on the spot question there. And the session is being recorded. Yeah. No, look, Jill, make no mistake. So there's definitely a way that we need to work together in order to get that going. So the short answer is we're definitely open to conversations and to get that going. The long answer is how do we put that into place? As it stands right now, we have a situation with LSPs where we're going to these opportunities. Firstly, we need to drive the business because, as I mentioned, businesses need customers to come in order for us to be ongoing and to support our stuff. But the other part of it as well is we don't want to undercut each other either, because every time we have to try and undercut each other, it hurts the interpreters in the background. And that's something that we need to try and manage accordingly within the environment. So I hope that answers your question high level, that we are open to have those conversations. But once again, it needs to be driven from not only an AUSIT and the government perspective in order for us to apply to that. But yeah, from an LSP perspective, we need to look at it, yes.
Thank you so much. And I think that point there around the role of procurement, Ali, is really important, that, again, minimum standards need to be set in contracts. And I really appreciate that notion of LSPs. What is their role? How do we know that they're a good provider? And governments need to actually be able to assess that against criteria so that those good providers get the jobs. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? So, Ali, I would like to know when can we expect any tangible results out of all review? Because you're doing the policy work, and I would like to see the result. I mean, you don't make the laws, you don't make the decisions, but the decision makers will have to be confronted with this review. So I'm not putting you on the spot, but I would like to know roughly if there are time scales, so that also we can become more noisy if by the time of the due date, there is nothing coming. And I know that your work is subject to the winds of political environment in Australia in general. But do you have a date?
Yeah, next week, Angelo. Look, there's a couple of things. The key thing we're really feeding into is the Multicultural Framework Review, and that report is due to be released in March next year. And then there'll be a government response to that, and we expect recommendations then to feed into subsequent budget processes. And then, of course, similar probably timings with the recommendations from the Disability Royal Commission. Not on the spot at all, thanks.
Hello, time is definitely up. Part of our intention was to enable a conversation, a broad conversation. So I'm sorry that we weren't able to do that. Again, organisational thing in terms of the number of people that we invited to participate in the roundtable. I hope this has still been at least good input to think about, and let's enable the way to have the conversation. For those of you that are AUSIT members, maybe we can use LearnBook as a way of consolidating some thoughts on this session and getting those thoughts back to the participants here as well. Thank you all very much. Lunch is in the courtyard.